Janet, real pleasure to have you on. I've been really looking forward to today's conversation. We have a lot of ground to cover, but I'll maybe start with a personal question. Are you better at swimming, cycling, or running?
Oh, that's easy. I think, you know what? Definitely it's not swimming. It used to always be running because I was a competitive runner all through high school and university. Although my cycling is coming along now. So I'd say it's sort of a cross between the two of them.
Interesting. Yeah, like I'm not a triathlete by any stretch, but I do like cycling. I used to be a little bit into running, and swimming scares me. I think if I ever tried a triathlon, I'd probably, like, I think it's be swim survive, less about competition.
Well, the good thing about the triathlon is this for all those non-swimmers out there is this swim is the shortest percentage of the time, and so if you have to have sort of a week event, definitely swim is the place to be. Place to be relatively weak.
Yeah. I think I could probably make a bunch of cheesy analogies about triathlons and like startups and entrepreneurs, but I'll try and spare you that. I do obviously want to talk about your career and your stellar career, and obviously a lot about Real. Maybe we want to rewind the clock and talk about Kijiji a little bit because I think it's a brand that's very familiar. I still use it. So curious, maybe walk us through the history a little bit, Kijiji, your the exits. I'd love to hear a little bit, obviously, from someone that was basically running the show.
Yeah. So basically, so I moved to California and joined eBay in early 2000, in like January of 2000. And it was a great experience. Spent 3.5 years at eBay in Silicon Valley. And my role at eBay it was to basically grow the non-classifieds businesses. So when I first joined eBay, it was 80 or 90% of the things bought and sold on eBay were collectibles, so things like coins and stamps, and I was responsible for the non-collectibles categories, things like home and garden, jewelry, books, etc. So spent about 3.5 years at eBay building the non-collectibles side of the business. Awesome experience, great people, learned a ton about marketplaces. I then wanted to move back to Canada. My husband and I are both from Canada, and we wanted to have our family here and build our lives here. And so I talked to the folks at eBay and said, "Hey, eBay, can I move back to Canada?" And they said, "Sure. If that's what you want to do, we'll support you. Let us go see what opportunities are available in Canada." And they came back and they said, "Okay, the only opportunity that we have available in Canada is head of product. So basically, responsible for the eBay.ca website." Which at the time I thought, yeah, just wasn't something that I really wanted to do. But I thought, you know what, that's no problem. It's my ticket home. I will do that. And then when I get there, I'll see where that job can lead. And so came back to Canada, to Toronto with eBay. And the first thing I did in my new role was I benchmarked how is eBay Canada doing relative to other eBay countries around the world. And what I immediately saw was that in Canada, we were doing a great job of getting online Canadians to eBay. In fact, Canada had one of the highest penetration rates in the world in terms of the percentage of online users who were going to eBay. However, our conversion rate, or the likelihood that somebody who went to the site would actually do anything on the site, it was half that of every other country in the world. So I thought, okay, this is really interesting. What do we need to do on the product side to try to address that issue? And we tried some things that, frankly, didn't really work. And I started digging into this problem a bit more and found that the research showed that Canadians spent a ton of time online, but preferred to transact offline. So they were going online and they were researching, but they were completing the transaction offline. And so I thought, okay, that is really interesting. And given that dynamic, which I'm not sure we're going to be able to change in the short term, is there a different model that is more suited to those characteristics of Canadian consumers? And I actually came up with 4 or 5 different models that I thought might work in that context. And I narrowed them down and narrowed it down to classifieds, which I thought would be very successful in Canada. Because with classifieds, you're researching online, but transacting the purchase, completing the transaction in person. And so Craigslist already existed in Canada. It was growing, but I thought there was an opportunity for eBay to launch a classified site. And so I went to the executives that I knew in California and I said, hey, here's all the data, here's the stats, here's why I think we should be launching a classified site in Canada and why it would be successful. And they said, no, we don't think it's going to work. Craigslist is already there. And besides which, Canada is not really that significant a market for us. But I really loved this idea and I thought that it would be successful. So I didn't give up on it. I kept sort of talking to people within eBay and digging around. And what I discovered was that eBay was getting ready to launch a classifieds platform in Europe. So I went back to the executives in California and I said, hey, eBay is getting ready to launch a classified site in the US. Can I just take this platform and localize it for the Canadian market and launch it? And so again, after more back and forth, they finally said, okay, yes, that's fine, Janet, you can do that. And hence launched Kijiji in Canada. And it was successful. Interestingly enough, I heard somebody once who said, Janet, like eBay just seemed to not eBay, Kijiji seemed to like come out of nowhere. And like all of a sudden it was everywhere. And it was like just such an overnight success. And I thought to myself, it just didn't feel like that. I remember an awful lot of hard work and times when we were like, I don't know if this is going to work. And so I sort of tell that story because I think it probably a lot of founders out there can relate who are working really hard to make their businesses successful. That I don't know if there's many founders who ever think that their business feels like an overnight success. Regardless how successful a business is, there's always a lot of work and trial and error and experimentation that goes into it.
Yeah, that's an amazing story, right? Like 10 years to an overnight success.
Yes.
Did you anticipate the scale and speed? Like obviously you had that unique insight that, that you pushed for, that you fought for. Did you anticipate that growth? Was that a surprise to you?
Um, Not in like I always thought it could be successful. Probably not, maybe not as successful as it is today. I think the idea that it's a household name, like, took me a while to get used to. But I remember from the earliest days saying to the team, guys, like, this can be bigger than eBay. We're going to be bigger than eBay in Canada. And like, we're going to be bigger than Craigslist. And sort of like that mentality. And so I think in one way, I always believed that we were going to be big and sort of rallied the team around that. And yet, on the other hand, in another way, it's like, wow, I can't believe it. I still like get together with the folks who were very early, and we're like, yeah, can you believe it? Like, this is something we created, and like almost everybody knows Kijiji. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, I think that's a great lesson, right? Where it's, I think even if you talk to most founders that had that level of success, they don't think they imagine that how big it would be. And I think it speaks to just the scale of the internet, where it's like it still feels like early innings, even though let's say maybe it's the end of the first inning, but in terms of a cycle, it's still surprising at how much headroom there is. And I think there maybe it could be uh, you know, um, we can make a segue in terms of how you think ambition for founders, how your experience also kind of shapes the way you coach your founders in terms of thinking bigger. I'd be curious to hear you maybe a little bit on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, like as I said, in a way, I was like, I always knew it could be huge, and um, people sort of used to say, "Oh, there's no way," right? Or, I mean, another example of sort of dreaming big and having people say, "Oh, it's not going to work." Actually, well, I'll give you a Kijiji example, um, which maybe some founders can relate to. Is that so? When we launched Kijiji in Canada, we had very little budget. I was trying to get the word out, and so my idea was to use PR and to because I was like, I would literally call up these reporters and these news stations and these radio stations and try to get them to do a story on us. And one time I got a reporter from the National Post and he was like, okay, Janet, like, this sounds interesting, I'll interview you. So I was like, so like excited, right? I prepped for it. I drove over to the office, which is up in Don Mills, and I'll never forget this. I went in, I was like so excited, and basically, we sat there for half an hour, and he proceeded to berate me for the entire 30 minutes and tell me why this was a bad idea, why it would never be successful. And like, Janet, don't you know that Craigslist is here? And even if like, and you'll never make any money and you'll never be successful. Like, okay, there were my high hopes. Anyway, so, and I remember going home and like, or going back to the office, and I sort of was deflated for a little bit. And then I was like, no, like, I'm going to show him. Like, I'm going to show that guy that he's wrong. And so I think in terms of the founder mentality, I think to be successful, it's sort of a mix of that, dreaming really big and yet at the same time being appreciative of what you accomplish. It's, being willing to, take those hits with people who say you're never going to do it and turn that into determination. It's like something I sometimes say, don't get discouraged, get determined. And one thing, when it comes to founders, that I'm a huge believer in that I have noticed absolutely is that success as a founder is not correlated to the number of years in business or number of years in the industry or anything like that. Success is much more correlated to the grit and the passion and the perseverance and the ability to learn and to grow from your experiences. And so, in terms of, hey, how does that parlay into working with founders? Is I love to work with founders and helping them. Okay, how do we reframe this? How do we like keep going? And hey, maybe this is actually this is maybe this is going to be a good thing. And how do we change our mindset or change this from being something bad to maybe, hey, we can leverage that and it's actually the stepping stone to build an even bigger business.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few tidbits of wisdom I think you just shared, Janet, in terms of like, I think for me the biggest thing that is always this duality, is always this oxymoron of, like being an entrepreneur founder is almost like bipolar, right? You have these like crazy wins in the same, and then in the same day you have, let's say, a key employee hitting. So it's almost like managing your own emotions. But like you said, there's almost no correlation with like, skin color, background, years in the industry. It's really how, your internal drive really pushes you forward. It sounds like this is like your key passion in terms of working with founders. How do you then, as you're, I'm going to reverse the question, as since you're obviously managing partner of Real, how do you think about this approach for your own firm? So how do you bring that approach to growing Real, having a bigger impact as a VC firm?
Yeah. So I would say, so, I love, as you say, I love what I do. I love working with founders. I love being the managing partner of Real Ventures. I think one thing, I mean, there's lots of different components that I could talk to around that. One thing that maybe I'll share that may be helpful to all the listeners out there is one of the things that we do at Real Ventures is we think hard about what is each individual's zone of genius. And when I say zone of genius, I mean the thing that people do that they are outstanding at and that gives them energy. And then how do we design the firm such that people are working as much as possible in the zone of genius? And also, how do we make sure that we hire a team that is very diverse so that we have different zones of genius? And I think this is interesting in the venture context because at most venture capital firms, the partners and the principals and the associates are expected to be almost like vertical, right? Or to be full stack. And maybe that's the way to talk about it, right? And partners are expected to go out to meet with founders, to decide which companies to invest in, to make those investments, to sit on the boards, to develop the companies and help them all the way to exit. And well, yes, we are structured where every investment professional is expected to do that full stack. We also recognize that everybody on the team is going to be have a unique zone of genius in one of those areas. And so we should work as a team to help across the portfolio. So for instance, there's one person on our team who is great at helping our companies write their deck, like their pitch deck, and tell their story in a great way. So he worked across all of our companies helping that, not just across his company. There's other people on our team who are excellent at helping our companies develop their financial model. Well, he will work with all of our companies. For me, I come from a marketplace background. I love talking to companies about how do they go, if they have a marketplace component, how do they think about marketplace growth? What are the metrics? And I will happily go and work with any company in our portfolio that's thinking about those issues. So that's sort of one way that I think about, as a venture capital firm, how do we as a team have the most impact?
Yes, it's like areas of value, right? Value creation tends to be really the hot topic. I think particularly today, and I want to come back to this topic of value creation. And I find that the way you're describing it is really how you build value. So the different mechanisms and bolts of how you can help a founder go from point A to point B. Then I guess a simple question is, how do you measure then success externally? I guess number of unicorns or portfolio. I think you mentioned that you guys are currently raising. So just maybe the key benchmarks that you're looking for in terms of how you track success.
Yeah, it's a very good question. So um, we think of it in terms of, you need, for your LPs, you need to deliver outstanding financial returns. And we have a track record of delivering top quartile returns. As you said, we have 4 unicorns that are together, have a market valuation of almost $12 billion. We have many more, half unicorns. I don't know if you call them semi unicorns or not, and a lot of other companies that are on the path, which is great. But I think one of the things that I love about Real Ventures is we do not measure our success solely by the financial metrics. We sort of think, hey, you need to have those financial metrics to sort of get on the playing field. You absolutely need to have those. But then it's everything else that you do above and beyond that. And we as a team are very driven to make a difference. And how do we make a difference? In a couple of dimensions. First of all, we are extremely committed to the Canadian tech ecosystem. We are huge believers in the power of Canadian entrepreneurs, and we invest heavily in that and in growing the talent of Canadian founders and others who are involved in Canadian startups. We also care very much about what the companies are doing, and we like to invest in companies that have a bold ambition to make the world a better place. Not necessarily in an impact way, we're not an impact fund, but we do think before every investment, what will happen if this company is super successful and change the world? How will they change the world? We also think about this, how is this company managed in terms of how do they treat their team? How do they think about diversity and inclusion? So that's sort of the second thing. So one is the ecosystem. Second is the type of companies that they're building. And then the third is the founders themselves. And we think about the value add that we bring to our companies in two areas. One is we talk about company development, which is all the things that most VCs will talk about doing, helping them with introductions, helping them with hiring, helping them with, their financial model or raising the next fund and everything in that bucket. And then we also think about founder development and how can we help the founders be the best leaders that they can be? Because frankly, being a founder is one of the most, if not the most challenging jobs, particularly when your company is growing very quickly. And you have to reinvent yourself every year or every 6 months.
Yeah, I like those three pieces. I want to go back to the second piece, right? So in terms of type of company, you mentioned you're not an impact fund, but how does that play out in the, in between the four walls? Like, is it something that you embed within the investment thesis, or is it something that's just debated, let's say, around the partner table when there's an investment decision to be made?
So the way we do it, which will sort of go into how we do investments, and sort of we'll touch on a couple of different things, is one aspect of our investment process is that if a company comes in and pitches, when the company leaves the room, all of the investment partners fill out a survey, which takes about 10 or 15 minutes just to fill out. Like, what do you think about the product? Here's the pros and cons, etc. What do you think about the team here? What are the threats to it? How big do you think this can be, etc., etc. And one of those areas is, what do you think? Like, how do you see the long-term impact of the business? Do we think that the founder will build a positive culture, right? There's all sorts of different questions. So that's sort of one thing. And then when every partner is finished completing that survey, we then compile all the results and go through them and have a discussion. But I think, just as an aside, why do we go to all that effort? Because several years ago, that wasn't the way we did it. We just did it. Okay, founder left the room. Okay, let's just jump in and know who thinks what. And the reason we changed it to this new format is two major reasons. One of which, it gives everybody a chance to think and communicate before, frankly, the loudest person in the room has a chance to speak. And we know that we've got introverts and extroverts on the team, and we know that introverts like to think and reflect, and we didn't want those people to be unduly influenced by the extroverts. The other thing that it does is I believe that it helps in terms of when we think about diversity and inclusion. There has been a lot of research that has been done that say within VC there's an unconscious bias where female founders and others are judged against a different standard, particularly in the case of qualitative measures. And what this process enables us to do is to be very thoughtful and specific in terms of what's good, what's not good, what we like about the business, what risks we see. And we have found, on the topic of diversity and inclusion, again, we are not a female-focused fund. We are focused on the very best entrepreneurs. But over the last 3 years, 50% of our largest 20 investments have gone into a company with a female founder or co-founder. North American-wide, that number is 11%. So rather than 11%, we're at 50%. And I think I think there's a lot of reasons in that, and I could talk about all the things that we do. But one is we make sure that internally we try to do whatever we can to eliminate that unconscious bias, which is proven to exist within most VC firms.
Yeah, I love that aspect of writing down your ideas kind of eliminates it. It's a trick actually we've used at our firm, just like in terms of getting a group of execs and writing down versus the other way of, like you said, of just like people spitball through ideas and typically ends up being the person that has, the loudest voice, is most charismatic, but not necessarily judged by the quality of their ideas when you're forced to write it down. Maybe another personal question is, what motivated you to take over the reins of the firm? Was it an easy decision to make? Did it excite you at that time? Because now it's been a little bit more than a year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think so. When I was approached to lead Real Ventures, I guess overall I thought about it as being a big responsibility. And so, I love Real Ventures. I love the firm. I love the mission. And so, really, the question that I asked myself is, do I think that I could do a good job in this? And do I think that I could add value to the firm? And that really was the question that I asked myself, and had to think about that and talk to the different partners and people inside and outside the firm, and finally decided that I could add value. One of the things about me when I compare myself to some of the more senior partners or the partners at the firm who had been there longer is that I had more operating experience. And so, what they said to me is, hey, as Real Ventures is growing, we've now raised 5 funds. We've got a team of 20 people, which isn't too large a team for a business, but it's actually a rather complicated business with all the portfolio companies, and we're changing how we operate and things. And given the fact that I have the most operating experience and I have a track record in that, they thought, hey, maybe now is this time for Janet to move into the managing partner role, and some of the other partners to focus on their initial love, which was making investments.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it ties into, I think, the third pillar that you brought up before about founder development. So I see maybe a little bit of your writing on this in terms of like conscious leadership. So maybe a two-part question is, I'd love to hear a little bit more about this notion of founder development, which the third leg of the stool, and then any other big ambitions in terms of how you see the firm playing out in the Canadian tech ecosystem in the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of founder development, over our history, we have led the seed round in many companies, and 90%, or sorry, 90, not 90%, 90 companies of ours where we led the seed round have gone on to raise a Series A. We have learned a lot about what it takes to get companies to Series A. We used to see our role as we would help companies get from seed to a strong Series A. However, we saw over the years too many times where companies raised a strong Series A and then fumbled afterwards, fumbled after the Series A or after the Series B. And we looked at why that was. And in almost all of the cases, it was because the founder was not ready to scale as quickly as the business. And so we said, hey, if our mandate is not just to get companies from C to Series A, our mandate is to get companies from C to Series A in a way that sets them up for long-term success and long-term exit, recognizing that that could be 10 years in the future. And so with that mindset, we went back and we spent time looking at, hey, what is it that trips up founders? Why is it that some founders who have, virtually no business experience to speak of can go on and just scale themselves and grow and lead a multi-100-person company with operations all over the world, and other people just fall down? And what is it? And how can we both screen for those characteristics? And secondly, how can we develop those characteristics in our founders? And what we found, as I sort of alluded to earlier, it wasn't years of experience. It was three things that characteristics, which we now actively, as I said, screen for and develop. Number one is self-awareness. And by self-awareness, what I mean is being aware of one's strengths and one's weaknesses. And tied to that, being able to grow personally. They see, maybe they don't see their blind spots, because blind spots sort of by definition are blind spots, but when pointed out to them, they recognize it, they take responsibility, they're like, yes, here's where I'm good, here's where I'm not good. And they own that, and they own their own growth. So that's sort of one bucket. Second is personal accountability. And this really comes down to, how does the person respond when something goes bad? When something goes bad, do they take personal responsibility and ownership and say, you know what, okay, I understand, here's my role in that situation, and here's what I'm going to do, or here's where we're going to go? Or do they say, well, it wasn't my fault, or it was this? And I think that when I'm talking about this, it can come down to interpersonal relationships, or it can come down to, hey, what a competitor is doing, or whatever. Is how much does the founder take, hey, I'm taking personal accountability for this, and I know that I have the ability to influence the outcome, and I'm going to be involved in that. And then the third thing really is around having a compelling vision and being able to attract other people to that. And this is also about, tied to that is, can the person attract, retain, and motivate amazing people to work alongside them? Because no company is ever going to be built by one individual. And can the person, as I said, attract people who are even better than them and come and work with them? And can they work effectively with those people?
How much do you, I think there's a great, Janet. How much do you think that these three elements are a differentiator in today's market, right? So like maybe talk a little bit about competitive advantage. We're seeing a lot, obviously, an abundance of capital, the notion of dry powder. We're seeing a lot of like crossover funds, like, Tiger famously being now in the Canadian market. Do you find that being public about these characteristics helps you attract like-minded founders, or in the day-to-day it helps, but it's still a competitive landscape?
I think that right now, for strong founders, they can raise money from multiple sources. And so I think that, money is a commodity. And so our approach is to invest in companies, not because we necessarily, our approach is to invest in the best companies because the founders want us in those companies. And they want us in those companies both because of the value that we provide and also because of the types of relationships that they can have with us.
Yeah, I think that's great because it's like you're there really from the early days, right? So it's not just that here's the money, like the Tiger model, here's money, and like we don't even want a board seat. You're there to really help them, excel throughout their careers. So I think it's a really huge value add, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
One key element of Real that we didn't talk about is really this notion of ecosystem development, right? As a Montrealer, I think I've just witnessed, from let's say pre 2007 or pre foundation of the firm, it wasn't much of a tech ecosystem in Montreal. It was still early days, and I think Real Ventures obviously played a really integral role in helping develop it. How do you think about ecosystem development moving forward now that we're, let's say we're past the initial embryonic stage? So what any initiatives or any thoughts as to how you think about the tech ecosystem?
So, Wheel Ventures, as you say, has always been committed to building the ecosystem. Interestingly enough, Wheel Ventures, as you alluded to, was founded in 2007. And really, when Wheel Ventures was founded, the insight was from the three founding partners, hey, we want to be venture capitalists, but there's not really much of a tech ecosystem to invest in. So in order for us to be successful, we need to make Canada successful. We need to make Canada a great place to start and to scale a tech company. But from our roots, we have been committed to building that ecosystem, and I would say, and that effort has not let up. Absolutely, the Canadian tech ecosystem is is miles ahead of where it used to be, and that's great and it's exciting. Just for perspective, in the last 3 years, 72% of our companies that we've invested in have a repeat founder. Which is just gives you a sense of the type of founders that we're investing in. We still love investing in first time founders for sure. Um, but in terms of the ecosystem, that being said, I think that it is never like the job is never done. And so what we have done is we are now focusing, for instance, I'll talk about one program that we're doing, which is called Front Row Ventures, which we launched 3 years ago. And what this program does is it works. We now have a presence with Front Row Ventures on over 20 campuses. And we have students that are Front Row Ventures ambassadors that are on campus that are identifying the next best technology companies being created in the labs, in university labs, and writing $25,000 checks into those companies. So that is ecosystem development. It's like we didn't do that 14 years ago, but we're doing it now. So it's still ecosystem development. It's a little bit different. I believe that you always need to keep priming the pump, right? Or you always need to keep that flow of new entrepreneurs coming. It's never the situation where it's like, oh, great, we did all this groundwork. Now we don't need to worry about it. It's like, no, no, no. You need to keep that pipeline full. You always need to be making sure that there are awesome entrepreneurs and other and tech people who want to join great tech companies who are committed to growing awesome companies.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Janet. Well, I want to go back to maybe a point of you mentioned about diversity before, and having more women founders, and obviously, I think you're a key role model in the Canadian technology landscape. What advice would you have for women that want to break into VC or as entrepreneurs? Any key insights since you spent obviously your entire career as the female sticking out, and then obviously it seems to be changing, but we still have a lot of ground to catch up.
Yeah, two things. Number one, I would say go for it. And then the second, and I do believe there's never been a better time to be a female in tech. So go for it. Number two, I'm just a big believer in your attitude and positivity. And I'll give you one example of sort of how my mind works. But I remember I was over in Europe once at a big event for senior leaders in technology. And I walked into this room, and all I could see was a sea of men in blue suits. It was actually like I laughed myself, and I thought, "Oh my gosh, this is hilarious! Not only are they all men, but they're all wearing these same blue suits. This is actually quite funny." Um, but I was like, "Okay, this is awesome," because we got this networking event for the next 3 hours, and at the end of 3 hours, everybody's going to go home. They're going to go to bed. They're going to wake up the next morning, and they're not going to remember who they met. They will have met all these people, and the faces and the names will all blur together. But if they only meet one or two women, I've got a much better chance of being remembered. So, like, I am all in here. This is my chance. I'm going to go in and I'm going to meet some people. And hopefully, when I follow up on email with them tomorrow, they'll put a name to a face. And so I think part of it is just absolutely go for it. Go for it. It's never been a better time. And never see yourself, whatever aspect of yourself, as a detriment, but just figure out, okay, how am I going to use this to my advantage?
I think you gave me an idea for a tattoo. I'm just gonna go for it. It's such a great tagline. Janet, I think we could probably talk for hours. I could poke your brain on a million more questions. This has been amazing. Final question: if people want to learn more about the work that you guys are doing at Real Ventures, or reach out and connect directly, what's the best way?
Absolutely. So feel free to connect. Our website is realventures.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Please feel free to reach out anyway. Love to connect with other people.
Janet, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.